engaged in order to create it?
Sure. YMCA redress was an integral component of YMCA acknowledging that there were survivors of child sexual abuse within our history and also the contemporary ones. It was important that our apology had substance behind it too, so that we could have a tangible ability to support survivors of child sexual abuse within the YMCA. So the redress consultation began because of that premise. We needed to be an organisation that acknowledged that we had child sexual abuse within our history and that we needed to have a tangible opportunity to support survivors of child sexual abuse. The consultation began in 2013. It was difficult for us to navigate as to how to do this because there's not a lot of literature around it. The Royal Commission's position on redress was our main area of focus and our main informer of how to do this. Also, throughout the consultation process, we were really aware that we needed to get external expert advice too, because nobody within the YMCA had the expertise to provide to the table in relation to redress. So in 2013, a reference group was formed that had internal and external people that had been involved with some sort of redress at different redress schemes, and then we started to write some policies and procedures, and mainly the intent of redress was the first thing we started with in relation to going out to the member associations. Right from the word go, we knew we needed to have a nationally consistent approach, and we knew that wouldn't be easy because we were looking at the 21 members coming together to support that, and there was different things going on in different states and different territories in relation to this. The scheme has always been formed with the intent of it being interim because we do absolutely support a national Commonwealth redress scheme. We feel that that is the only way that equity would be provided to all survivors of child sexual abuse, and that, you know, organisations come and go in their history as well, and for that to be the case, for survivors to get the most out of any sort of redress, the Commonwealth scheme is our preferred option. But in the interim, before that eventuates, we needed to look at how we could support survivors now and into the near future.
The insurance arrangements among your 21 member associations is similar, different?
We actually have a national insurance scheme. So in about 1990, I think it was, from the records I'm aware of, is when the members got together in a national insurance scheme.
So that's not an impediment to you moving down the redress path?
No, we were very purposeful about engaging the underwriters of our insurance program in the discussion. So over the history of our program since 1990, we've had 3 or 4 different underwriters, and it was really important for us to go and talk to them as well. They had learnings for us in the claims, you know, the civil claim area, but we were keen that redress didn't touch on that area. That wasn't its purpose, but also wanted to know that we weren't going to sort of affect civil claimability of survivors as well. And so we were very purposeful about talking to our underwriters, and they're very knowledgeable that we have YMCA redress. They're supportive of the fact that we do, and we will have redress regardless of whether it would prejudice a claim or not, but we feel that it wouldn't. It would be of support to survivors in the interim of a civil matter being a lot more confrontational than a redress approach.
Where will the money come from?
YMCA's around Australia.
Not the insurers?
No.
You then had to go to the 21 member associations to get approval?
Yes, we did, yes.
And did you do that at an early stage in your negotiations or with a product that was completely formed?
It was very hard to have a completely formed product because the environment was consistent, constantly changing. And we were learning as we were going. There was no one redress scheme out there as to in relation to how we could pull ours together. We had quite a bit of information around what not to do, but we really needed to work out what to do to best support survivors and be open and transparent.
So is it the case that the YMCA Australia very much took the initiative on the fact and content of a scheme?
Absolutely. It was a leadership piece. We did have, we work in a very consultative manner with our members because our members also have considerable competencies and ability to contribute. It was a matter of collectively bringing this together. And at the end of the day, it was going to require a vote by the members to make sure it was nationally consistent. And I think from Y Australia's perspective, it was so important that it was, that we had to have a collective view and we had to go through the process of consultation to ensure that we did have a collective view.
If one YMCA entity doesn't have the funds to pay an appropriate and accepted redress claim, what happens?
YMCA Australia has an amount of money that it's set aside as a central fund. That's coming out of its investments to ensure that any YMCA that is no longer in existence or doesn't have the ability to pay, that there will be money available for any survivors that are linked to those particular members. If a member does exist, then the member actually pays the redress applicable to that particular association.
And the pool from which you will draw, if there is no entity or no entity with sufficient funds, has a bottom to it, or is it a bottomless pit?
No, it's not a bottomless pit. We are an organisation who needs to survive financially. So there was an amount put aside, and then dependent on the experience we have with that particular pool, it will be up to the members to decide how to replenish the scheme as we go.
Now, you have announced the scheme.
Yes.
And perhaps you can tell us the key parts of the scheme.
The scheme, to me, is very survivor-focused. It's about ensuring that we provide something that a survivor could come to and also provide the support that the survivor needs. We've undertaken trauma-informed approach support, learnings how to do that, learning how to make sure that the scheme meets the requirements of being trauma-informed, which was a large part of that, and anybody who has direct contact with survivors in the sense of having providing a personal apology or anything like that is required to have undertaken a trauma-informed approach.
Is there a central administration so that if I was to make a complaint, I go to the one body?
Yes, we've actually formed a national redress panel who are, it's got 3 people on it who are external to the organisation and have significant qualifications in relation to being able to work as a redress panel. And then I personally sit on that too, and the member association person will come to that too in relation to how the determination of the panel.
So an application is made to YMCA Australia?
Or the redress panel, and it can come directly to us, or it can also go to a third-party independent person if the survivor's not wanting to talk to the organisation itself.
And is there an administrative body that determines factual matters, that there wasn't YMCA entity such as was described, the person attended something at the time, that sort of thing?
We'll gather some data, but the panel itself with those 3 independents is the one that will actually also determine reasonable likelihood, which is our burden of proof component to the scheme.
Based on information provided by a secretariat of some sort?
Oh, sorry, yes, we have a secretariat within YMCA Australia.
And having signed up to the redress scheme, I take it that each of the associations consider themselves obliged to provide whatever information is needed to assess an application?
Absolutely. The historical record keeping is an area of concern for us. It is what it is, but it is sparse in relation to records from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So we do go as far as even trying to understand what the environment was in relation to those YMCAs during those periods of time, and looking if there's any knowledge holders within the associations too who could let us know things in relation to, did we run gymnastics there? Did we have a volunteer program? Did we have camping at that particular association?
Is there process for a person to speak to their application?
Absolutely. They can speak to the panel or the panel chair, or the YMCA involved. It is very much about who they feel most comfortable coming to and speaking to. So we don't determine who that is. We give them the ability to choose who they would like to speak to.
How did you determine the amount of money that would be available?
We got some actuarial advice on the bounds of our redress program. Again, it's been set up to be an interim program, but we also needed to ensure that the program was sustainable into the future, that the YMCA could afford to pay the survivors as they came forward. We're very aware that it can take up to 22 years for survivors to come forward, so we don't have any time limits on our redress program. And therefore we needed to ensure its sustainability across a time period. And we did get some advice. We had very little data to work with, less than a handful of known events for us. So we were looking at gaining some understanding of what could have occurred from research. Media scans were done of the time. We looked really widely and broadly at what was a possibility or a red flag, or to see how we could gain some sort of meaningful data to ensure sustainability of the fund.
So on what basis did you decide the upper level, which is, just remind us?
90,000 for the upper level. That was based on our actuarial advice, along with the risk profiling that we did in relation to what that would look like, the sustainability to ensure that, YMCA would be here into the future to pay survivors of child sexual abuse, and also any other the contributing factors of the abuse, in the sense that it would be a meaningful amount that would help support survivors of child sexual abuse.
Have you developed a matrix by which you determine how much a survivor might receive?
Yes, we have.
Tell us about your matrix.
The matrix is based on the Royal Commission's matrix. It is it's a severity, impact and additional factors. So severity is 40 out of 100, impact is 40 out of 100, and the additional factors would be the 20 out of 100.
What component of the scheme is in relation to counselling?
We have a maximum of $5,000 that is paid to support counselling for any survivor that comes forward.
And that $5,000 is part of the $90,000 or separate from it?
No, separate from. So that's above the $90,000 cap.
And the survivor can choose how they use that $5,000?
Oh, absolutely. They've got any way they choose to use that money is completely up to them.
Is there provision for an apology?
There's provision for an apology in writing or directly from the YMCA. So I've personally been involved with two that I've given in a face-to-face context, but the survivor can choose whether they receive them personally, in writing. We have a public apology that's now published on the website, which was a video of myself, and we also have that in written form. But again, it is very much up to the survivor as to whether they would like that to be the case or not.
Is the apology provided before or after the assessment by the panel as to the reasonable likelihood of the abuse having occurred?
Again, it's very survivor-driven. We don't mandate when that would be, or we don't recommend when that would be. The two I've personally been involved with has been before the redress panel. It's completely up to them.
Is there any requirement for the person seeking redress to sign some form of deed of release?
No, we have no deed of release or no confidentiality agreements in place with the redress scheme. The survivor has the right to gain redress, and then should they want to, then they have the ability to also file for a civil matter.
So is there any restriction on the amount of redress they may obtain depending upon an outcome of civil litigation?
No, I don't think so.
So if a person received, for argument's sake, $90,000 from redress, and then there was a mediation as part of civil litigation, would the $90,000 be taken into account in the mediation?
I believe it would be taken into account in relation to the civil claim, yes.
What about the payment of legal costs in relation to the survivor?
Our current YMCA redress does not cover the legal costs. It doesn't require the survivor to be legally represented. They can come directly to us, or they can come through their legal advisor. But within our process, we don't require it. It's not a monetary amount specific to legal costs.
And because you don't require them to sign a deed of release, there's not the necessity to seek legal advice because they're not signing a legally enforceable
correct, yes.
agreement.
Yes.
What other aspects are there of the redress scheme that we haven't talked about?
Look, the redress scheme, we hope, is easily accessible and widely known by survivors. When we did launch our redress scheme, we put it out on our public website. We popped it on social media so it would have far and wide reach. We sent it directly to the survivor advocate groups that we knew of. We sent it as far and wide with our partners as we could. Local members also sent it out directly to their partners, whether they were local governments or they were any sort of local partner that they were working closely with. We were very keen that it was out there, accessible, able to be viewed by survivors. The application process, we hope, is easy to access and easy to do. It's a form that's just filled out on our public website as well. So it was incredibly important that it was accessible, that our processes are transparent, that there's a third party involvement. It wasn't us making a determination about what we should do. It had more rigour around being informed by external parties, and we're pleased that the panel provides that level of expertise, which we don't have internally within the organisation as well.
What form of abuse is covered by the redress scheme?
A child sexual abuse.
So it's limited to sexual abuse while a child?
Of a child, yes.
And child defined as under?
Under 18 years of age, yes.
Thank you. Now, how many applications have you had since you launched?
Since we've launched, we've had 4 applications. So 2 came through. They were originally civil matters that when they came to us, we said we have redress coming in the near future. Would you like to consider that? And both of those matters did. And since September 13, we've also had another 2 that have come to us through the website or through them filling out the form on the website.
In relation to the first 2, did they withdraw from the civil litigation after they'd been through the redress process?
They chose to go with redress as the opportunity was there for that. They have the ability to file a civil matter later if they want to, but in this case, both now have been finalised by the panel, and both have decided to accept the redress payment. Again, because we don't require a deed of release, they they can pursue a civil matter should they want to.
Did they come to you through lawyers?
Yes, both of those did.
And the other two who accessed the website came without legal assistance?
That's correct, yes.
Did you ask them how they knew about it?
We haven't got to that point yet. No, we haven't. From the two that have come through, I'm not sure. I couldn't answer that correctly because I don't know.
Where are they up to?
The panel is meeting again on the 8th of December, so Thursday. So one of those matters will be looked at then, and then the other one will be looked at, I think now early February, because the panel aren't meeting in January.
Of the two that have completed, was it the case that it was done on the papers, or was there some oral component?
It was done on the information supplied, and because it had come through a lawyer, it was very comprehensive information. In both those cases, though, prior to redress, I'd met with the two survivors, so apologies had been issued to them personally by myself, and then with one particular one also, he wanted it in writing as well, so we pursued that as well.
In terms of civil litigation, there can be issues with some institutions about who the proper person is to sue, the proper defendant as it's often described. Is that anything that's come to your attention, that there are those who've been wishing to take legal action but haven't been able to find the right person to sue or the right body to sue?
Yeah, historically I think there was around about 67 member associations. We're now down to 21. Some of those associations have merged, but others ceased to exist. So in a civil litigation sense, there may not be an entity to sue, so to speak, but in a redress sense, the YMCA has been really keen to ensure there is some form of ability to access support and funds. So the redress transcends those associations no longer existing and allows them to access a redress payment.
As a matter of principle, has YMCA considered what approach they'd take in instructing their lawyers were it to be a case that a survivor couldn't work out who to sue, notwithstanding it was some YMCA entity? Does that happen?
Sorry.
Has it come to your attention that survivors have either identified the wrong person to sue or had trouble identifying the person to sue?
Yeah, we do have a couple of cases at the moment where if a civil matter was to be pursued, the entity no longer exists, and because we're looking at member associations holding their own legal liability in that space, and it's an uninsured liability at the moment, it's prudent of each member to consider what that is for them at the time.
So you leave that up to the individual members?
Where there's no entity to sue, unless they form redress, then yeah, that they actually don't have a pathway to go to a legal entity to sue because it no longer exists.
In terms of the Commonwealth scheme, have you indicated to anyone in the Commonwealth area that you wish to opt in?
We've been overt about wanting to talk about, opting into a Commonwealth scheme. We're absolute advocates for the fact that there is a Commonwealth scheme. It's important we know the detail. At the moment, we don't know the detail of a Commonwealth scheme, but we would be actively pursuing being involved with understanding it and also being pursued in working and navigating how the YMCA could opt into a national scheme.
Have you engaged with anyone in the Commonwealth departments about it?
We haven't, but from my understanding and my knowledge is we've been asked to meet with Prime Minister and Cabinet about our views on the national scheme. We haven't done that yet, but it's coming up.
The government, when it announced the national scheme, indicated the maximum would be 150,000. Is that going to be an impediment to the YMCA?
Depending on what that looks like, is probably my understanding of the organisation wants to be able to pay redress in a sustainable manner. I'm not sure what bounds come with the 150. I don't know if there are deeds of releases. We haven't been able to get any information in relation to what the Commonwealth are talking about. We also know from our investigation that not having residential care and children in a long-term care with us can have some differentiations around severity and impact, but I'm not suggesting that that's the case in all the cases. So we probably need to navigate. The 150 is higher than where we've landed on our sustainability, but we would have to work that out.
If there were deeds of release, would your insurer be more interested?
Deeds, possibly. We're actually in all cases, I think, uninsured pre-1990, so the organisation is picking up the liability by itself.
You've said in your statement that the removal of limitation periods in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland is a welcome development, and the lack of national consistency poses some problems. Can you explain that?
I think when you start to look at the intersection of redress with civil claim matters, where the statutes fallen, it's very clear to us that they have the ability to navigate into the civil matter, and where it hasn't, they can't in lots of cases. So it's probably more that the national consistency for us really helps us work towards ensuring we're nationally consistent as well. So uninsured liability for us is pre-1990 and we'll deal with that in the civil matter. But when we start to look at sustainability of that too, we need to take in the opportunity for survivors to look at the civil claim area as well as the redress.
So in those states where the statute of limitations no longer applies, it's a simple matter for you. You don't need to make any decisions as to whether or not you'll take the point, as it were. In those jurisdictions where it still exists, you'd have to make a decision whether or not you'd rely upon it in any defence. Is that right?
If it was a civil matter, I would suggest in all cases we will offer redress as an alternative. I've been party to civil matters before, not in sexual molestation, but in other claims areas, and the confrontational part and the level of evidence and the burden of proof is very different. So YMCA redress has been devised to alleviate some of those stressors, and we also know that information management and evidence of what went on back 50s, 60s and 70s and even 80s for us it's really hard to find it. And it's really, they didn't have attendance records back in those days, employment records, all sorts of things. The organisation was a lot more volunteer-based than it is today. So to provide an avenue that is less confrontational and to set the standard of reasonable likelihood, it's a survivor-focused approach by the Y.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honours. I have nothing further.
Now, does anyone else have any questions? No? Well, you obviously brought everyone to a silent halt.
Well, actually, Your Honour, there is one thing I omitted to ask. I'm told, I think, that Ms Kroll made some indication earlier about the number of members across Australia.
Member associations. And I think the amount you told us was not an amount you now understand to be the case. Oh, sorry, that was the international members. Sorry, yeah. So I halved it. I apologise. There's 120 international movements across the world, not, I think I said about 60. So
thank you for that clarification.
Sorry, can I just ask one question? In terms of the national organisation, we've heard from New South Wales that there were a number of child sexual abuse incidents. I think you've used the word allegation, but the definition is probably more broad than that. At what point does the national body become informed of a particular matter? So is there a requirement on the 21 associations to inform the national body of particular types of incidents, or do you only pick that up in some other audit or oversight way?
No, we do have a requirement that they provide critical incident information to YMCA Australia, and then there's also requirements under the National Insurance Program that stimulate that too. What we have found is that the definition of critical incident is varying across our members at the moment, and we actually have a project that started to take place about, I think about 4 months ago, which will help us put a more robust and collective definition around critical incident. We had found nationally that people were having extremely varying definitions of critical for us. What we have got though generally nationally is people report more rather than less, which I think is a good cultural norm to have. And I think eventually we would love to get to the position where we were having, of course, all the criticals notified to us in a very defined manner, but also looking at the trending data as far as red flags go, because that way we can actually preempt risk.
Who is looking at that data at the moment?
At the moment, it's disparate across the different members. There would be some members that are doing that in a more robust way than others. It's our objective to get to a collective definition of that and a collective system and process that would help us bring that together.
But when you say that there's a national critical incident reporting system, does that mean there's someone inside your jurisdiction at a national level who has an overview of that system at a national level?
Yes, that's correct. We have a national risk manager, and we have a national insurance manager, and we also have a claims specialist. So those three individuals are the ones that analyse the data that we get. And
does that individual group then have a responsibility to report on to some entities such as the board or council?
Our National Risk and Finance Committee gets all the critical incident reporting at the national level. So they're a subcommittee of the National Board, and the National Board get a quarterly report on all our critical incidents and incident management, and we work in partnership with the member association around the management of the critical incident.
And when was that system introduced nationally?
That system's been there for quite a while. I'd say the National Board have been getting critical incident management data for probably about 4 or 5 years now, but we've really refined it probably over the last 2 years to make sure it's meaningful, robust and fully informative for the National Board to ensure they can act and make prudent decisions on it.
And can I just change topics for a moment and perhaps start back with you, Ms. Hart, with respect to a much more general question. You've given a great deal of evidence before the Commission now with respect to cultural change inside the organisation of which you're the CEO. For the benefit or for the value of other like organisations listening, are you able to identify where there were any pockets of resistance or difficulty with respect to the introduction of that cultural change?
There were a number of pockets in some of the middle management where there was a culture, if you like, of growth. There was a real growth agenda for a period of time at the YMCA in New South Wales, and there weren't the processes, the systems or the focus on child protection and safeguarding, and there wasn't an ability by the organisation to realise that you can actually do both in a considered fashion. So typically a lot of in some of the areas of middle management, there wasn't that realisation that it was about a growth agenda and you had to have robust systems and processes. I think too the agenda of the executive is very key, and making decisions with children at the centre or child safety at the centre. and also the definition of what the role that you play. So I say that the middle management, and there was, I guess, from a children's services, which is a highly regulated environment, to the recreation side, which wasn't a highly regulated environment, and bringing everyone together, and that everyone's a mandatory reporter, everyone is accountable. It doesn't matter where you sit across the organisation. We all own, the concept of guardianship for children. So middle management and differentiation in the different divisions.
Does anyone else want to make any comment about those pockets of resistance?
I think one of the things that has been important in the transformation process for New South Wales is the congruence from the board down to the operational level, and that any weaknesses at any level pose a threat to the robust nature of what it is we're trying to achieve. So I think, whilst we talk about policy, it really is culture, and it's a major change management piece. So, I think we're on the journey. I don't think we've arrived. I don't think we'll ever arrive at the destination. Complacency might creep in then. But I think that organisational congruence and having buy-in and that kind of lens to children at the centre of any decision making, regardless of whether children are your primary client in your program area or not, is key, and that's where some of the blocks can be. But the leadership piece is really important.
I think also we still have some ways to go around how we communicate with children that use our services and parents. We've been exceedingly lucky where I think we've had great engagement from people such as the Ombudsman and the Children's Guardian, who have at times come into our organisation and spoken to our staff, and they've had some light bulb moments, which has been phenomenal. But I think it's end to end. It goes from someone on the pool deck at 5 a.m. to an educator looking after children at 7:30 a.m. to middle management, to myself and to the board, that we all are aligned.
Ms. Kroll,
Thanks.
if I could just give you a series of questions, please, with respect to your statement. If we can call up page 4. You've outlined in there A, B, C, D and E on pages 4 and 5 of participations. I wonder if on each of those, because I'm interested in where responsibility and liability lie for child safety. I wonder if in each of those categories you can tell us which of those your organisation would both own and operate.
It would be varying across Australia. There's different makeups of each of our members in relation to how they're structured. So in the majority of the out-of-school hours care and vacation care services, they're either run on school premises and in partnership with a school, or there could be some of the vacation care services or some of the OSH services that would be run at certain YMCA facilities. We have a mixture of owned facilities and leased facilities, of government tendered facilities.
Let me ask you a specific question.
Yeah.
If you look at A, you have 321 outside of school hours care and vacation care services, 48 kindergartens, 33 early learning long day care centres and 5 family in-home care services. Are those all contracted either with schools or government authorities?
No, the early learning centres wouldn't be in the majority. They would be owned or operated or leased or operated. The in-home and family care services would be a contract with the government. Kindergartens would be the same. And the OSH services will be a bit of a mixture of either children coming to a YMCA or them being run at the schools.
So isn't early learning long day care centre at all regulated or oversighted by education authorities?
Every one of those particular groups of programs actually do have a regulation attached to them because they would be funded through the childcare benefit as well.
And do you consider those to be school facilities or daycare facilities?
The long daycare ones, sorry.
You describe it as early learning. Now,
early
learning can have a specific school's relationship. It's a form of instruction for children and often has a loose or sometimes quite tight relationship with a nearby school.
We actually call our long daycare centres early learning centres. That's very specific and purposeful around the fact that we believe 0 to 5-year-olds deserve early learning, not just long day care. So it's probably more the way that we've framed them personally ourselves as early learning.
But the education authorities take no interest in them?
They're bound by the framework? The National Quality Framework. So because they would receive childcare benefit, they would be framed by the National Quality Framework.
And where do you consider, in a legal sense, liability and responsibility for child safety to lie, either with you or with the head contractor or shared by both?
Absolutely with the YMCA. If we provide services and care to children, it's our liability.
And if I switch later to item E, disability services, a similar question to you. Does that fall under the disability framework, and is the regulatory authority the state?
From what I understand, in the disability services, there's a lot of our YMCAs transitioning to the NDIS, which in that particular area, there would be programs that are run in YMCAs for children or adults with a disability specific. This one would particularly around the children, but and there would only, I think, from my understanding, there's probably 1 or 2 specific disability services that are
putting up our ribbons for Loud Fence, support of Loud Fence
for day programs for people
here at Salesian College.
But again, because we are the provider of the service, the liability and the care for the people within our service lies with the YMCA.
Salesian College, tying our ribbons in support of Loud Fence and survivors from all around Australia. Here we are, Salesian College.
I understood camping and outdoor education activities to be a very high volume area. Those camping and outdoor education activities at 20 campsites that you've listed, are those your own programs, standalone, or do you contract and provide those for schools or other bodies?
In the majority, they would be contracted to schools to provide. And from my understanding too, we do own some of those campsites, but others would be with the we are contractors to the government to provide the camping sites.
My understanding of most school camping arrangements are that parents and staff will often accompany the children. So when you conduct those camping operations, are they completely run by yourselves, or is it a shared running with the school? And so when you conduct those camping operations, are they completely run?
They have a camping program. Might be able to. They would. In my understanding, we are the operators of the program and would have responsibility for anybody that was on our site during that time. But as far as the intimate detail of how parents and the school staff become involved, would it be okay if I get New South Wales to...
Before you answer, I can put it into a little bit of context for you. I'm again interested in where liability and responsibility lie. And if you had overall authority, if there were, for instance, school staff members there, would you have authority over them? And if they act in a particular way, how is that a relationship managed?
From a child protection specifically, if they did anything that breached our policies, we are accountable and we would deal with that. So once they come into our camping environments, they work within our frameworks and within our child protection policies. They work with us. We have the program specialists, but we are also bound by our organisational policies, and they understand those organisational policies through our handbooks, through meetings that we have with them. So they have to adhere to our standards of conduct when they're on our sites.
And in a legal sense, if the school staff are attending, do they accept that as the school, that they fall under your authority on that site?
They do. That's very much made aware when they apply.
Just a last question to wrap up this range of questioning. You can see where the issues arise here of shared responsibility and perhaps shared liability. Are there any other points you want to make with respect to that range of services from A to E where there might be issues of responsibility or liability?
I just think it's been important that people are very aware of our child protection policy or our safeguarding children strategies when they use our services or we partner with them in our services. So we are working really hard to put forward that culture of extended guardianship. It's not so much just around about the legal responsibility or the legal liability. It is the fact that every child needs adults to care for them and to be guardians for them. And if you come into a YMCA facility or you're working with a YMCA facility, we would expect that of all people that work with us or for us as well.
Nothing further, Your Honour.
Well, thank you, each of you, for joining with us today. We, through our work, learn of change that's occurring across many institutions throughout Australia as a result of the impact of the Royal Commission. I say impact to cover the range of things which you would all very much appreciate. Firstly, of course, there's the exposure that comes through a public hearing process, and then there's the response within the organisation to that exposure, recognition of the problem, and then working out how to respond to that problem and manage going forward. And the account you've given today is a comprehensive account of the impact that the Royal Commission had on the YMCA. But it's also a very instructive story about how an institution which suffers that impact can and should respond. You can be assured that your story, as it were, is one that the Commission will repeat in multiple ways, because it is instructive of how the Commission can achieve change for the good of all children. But thank you again, and thank you for the engagement, which I know has been over a period of time between your organisation and the Royal Commission. I now need to say formally that you are all excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honour, tomorrow there will be a final hearing in respect of the Scouts.
10 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you, Your Honour.
We'll adjourn.